Hey, church. The title of our message this evening is True Religion. True Religion. So we're in chapter 58, but if you think back to chapter 56, to the end of the book, it gives us a theme of how you might identify the people of God. And that's how you know who the people of God are. You know, is it because they have a certain bloodline, or is it because them living in a certain geographical area? Is it because they have certain practices? Is that how you identify with the people of God? And the simple reading on the surface of the law of God would say that's exactly how you identify God's people, them and no others. And that is, if you're a descendant of Abraham and you keep the calendar and you eat kosher and you continue the practices of the Israel people, and you know, certain laws like Deuteronomy chapter 23 says no one else can come in. The passage forbids the entrance of a foreigner or a eunuch into the people of God. And yet, just as we saw 2 chapters ago in chapter 56, the grace of God opens what the law of God closes. And so, yes, the law forbids foreigners and the law forbids eunuchs, but God's grace says yes. Look at Isaiah 56, verse number 4. It says, "For thus saith the Lord unto the eunuchs that keep my Sabbaths and choose the things that please me and take hold of my covenant. Even unto them will I give in mine house and within my walls a place and a name better than of sons and daughters. I will give them an everlasting name that shall not be cut off. And also of the stranger that join themselves to the Lord to serve him and to love the name of the Lord, to be his servants, every one that keepeth the Sabbath from polluting it and taketh hold of my covenant. Even them will I bring to my holy mountain and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices shall be accepted upon mine altar. For my house shall be called an house of prayer for all people." And the grace of God opens a way where the law of God has closed that. And the law says you have no place here. And then we see in chapter 56, it shows us that when you come to God in true faith, that they will have a name that is eternal, it's everlasting. But the following passage, the end of chapter 56 and all of chapter 57, it really clarifies this. The question is, if you were just born within the circle, or if you're a descendant of Abraham, is that sufficient to be counted in? And the answer emphatically is absolutely not. He describes many in that day with images of uselessness. If you remember, we talked about it's like a guard who sleeps, or like a watchdog that doesn't bark, useless. Shepherds whose only interest are their own personal appetites. And he describes them by the way of their own religious practices, ascribing them to the vilest of pagan religion. And we talked about that on Sunday. And he goes through all of those things and just the wickedness and the immorality that's there. And the point being, even if you are a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and you are living in the land, but you are rejecting the God of Israel and you are embracing other gods, you have no place among God's people any more than a stranger or a foreigner that you disdain, the person that you don't like. In fact, you are exactly in the same place where you are. Your only hope is in the grace of God. And if you come to him in faith, you will be saved. And again, he says at the end of the chapter, in chapter 57, in verse 21, "There is no peace, saith my God, unto the wicked." And as we read the scriptures, we see these things illustrated for us. We see foreigners, or those on the outside, like Ruth, like Rahab, like Naaman. Naaman was an Assyrian. And all of those people exercised faith and are numbered with God's people. And we see those who are within, and within at the very top. But they're not one of God's people. Think of all the wicked kings of the northern kingdom, and how they embraced their own pagan gods. And many of the kings of the southern kingdom of Judah, they embraced wickedness as well. Think of Ahaz or Manasseh. Ahaz was the grandfather of Manasseh the grandson, and they're neck and neck competing for who can be the worst king in all of Judah. They're so wicked. And yet Second Chronicles tells us that Manasseh, he ended up repenting. That's to say that both of these kings, they stand in the place of the sinner. If you're going to choose wickedness, you are under the wrath of God unless you repent, just like those on the outside. And so, let's look at our text today. I have 4 points that I wrote down that I think is going to help break this text apart for us and help us understand it better. So number 1, the problem. The problem is empty religion. The problem is empty religion. So thus far, when you think about who are God's people, we're giving 2 categories to think about. We think about the pagan who embraced Jehovah, and who should be numbered among his people. That's you and I. We have the Israelites who reject Jehovah and should not be numbered among his people. And now chapter 58, it moves us to a 3rd category of people. And look at verse number 2. The Bible says, "Yet they seek me daily and delight to know my ways, as a nation that did righteousness and forsook not the ordinance of their God. They ask of me the ordinances of justice. They take delight in approaching to God." Then verse 3 goes on to describe them. "Wherefore have we fasted, say they, and thou seest not? Wherefore have we afflicted our soul, and thou takest no knowledge?" So if you see this description, and it sounds good, talking about their fasting. That's what the people of God were supposed to look like. The problem is you cannot isolate these verses, because when you look at what precedes them, then you can study what follows them. And this chapter opens and with Isaiah, who's tasked to use his voice like a trumpet, to sound off, to speak with his voice, to declare the transgressions, the sins of the house of Jacob. Look at, cry aloud, spare not, lift up thy voice like a trumpet. I'm reading verse 1. "And show my people their transgression, and the house of Jacob their sins." And so Isaiah is supposed to speak to the house of Jacob and show them their sins. And then we get this description as to why God is not listening to them. And it's talking about their pious, their fasting, their praying, and we see why God doesn't answer them. And the answer comes in the second half of verse 3. Because while they do fast, let's go ahead and look at the verse 3, the second half. "Behold, in the day of your fast, ye find pleasure, and exact all your labors." So realize to fast is to deny your appetite. But while you're fasting, he's saying you're not engaged in a true fast. And so their fast, their public religion is they're showing to others just how religious they really are. They're bragging about, well, I haven't eaten in 3 days. Well, I haven't eaten in 4 days. Well, I'm starving to death because I'm more spiritual than you. I'm more holy than you. And they're parading around their religion, but they haven't let go of their own personal interest. In fact, they're seeking their own interest through the abuse of those beneath them. And this hardness of heart to others, it's amplified. Look at verse 4. "Behold, ye fast for strife and debate, and to smite, and with the fist of wickedness. Ye shall not fast as ye do this day, to make your voice to be heard on high." He's saying when someone is fasting, they're fasting because they want God to hear their petition. But he says, you're fasting, but you're not doing yourself any favor because you're not helping your cause because God is not listening. But rather, your business is strife and debate. Have you ever talk to somebody that, they just knew so much more Bible than you, but they weren't using the Bible to convince you or to help you or to instruct you. They just wanted to be argumentative. They wanted to be degrading. They wanted to be demeaning. It's like the jerk of a husband that takes his Bible and misquotes and says, you see, the Bible says, submit to me. Now shut up, woman. That's not what the Bible is saying. Just because you quoted a verse does not make you a Bible scholar, especially when you take a verse out of context. And what's happening here is they're pouring on their fasting and their prayers and their Bible knowledge, and they're trying to show their spirituality. But God says, the way you treat others is showing out. You don't want my blessing. You don't want me in this. You don't want a relationship with me. All that you're doing, it's fake, it's phony, it's nonsense. Look at verse number 5. Is it such a fast that I have chosen? A day for a man to afflict his soul? Is it to bow down his head as a bulrush and to spread sackcloth and ashes under him? Wilt thou call this a fast and an acceptable day to the Lord? In other words, it's very showy religion. They're making a public display of their religiosity, but God is not impressed. And they're parading it around, and they're showing off to others and, how much Bible knowledge they have and how smart they are and how much service they do in church. And this is really foreshadowing the Pharisees. It's exactly what Jesus denounced, because the Pharisees, the scribes, they paraded around their religion. They loved the long robes. They loved the long prayers in public. They loved to fast in a manner where everybody knew they were fasting. But Jesus said, your hearts are like whited sepulchres. And Jesus was not impressed with the Pharisees. And here, God is not impressed at all with the people's phony, fake religion of their fast. Religious activity without pureness, without righteousness, is rejected by God every single time. And so the problem that we see is empty religion. Empty religion. Number 2, I want you to notice the solution is defined. So we see the problem is empty religion. Now the solution is defined. And the text takes us to what a fast should look like. Look at verse number 6. Is not this the fast that I have chosen, to loose the bands of the wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, and to let the oppressed go free, and that ye break every yoke? Is it not to deal thy bread to the hungry, and that thou bring the poor that are cast out to thy house? When thou seest the naked, that thou cover him, and that thou hide not thyself from thine own flesh? Again, this is from your own brothers and sisters in need. That's what he's talking about. God is saying, if you want to demonstrate to me the realness, the pureness, the earnestness of your religion, here are some more substantive things that you can be caring about. Loosening the burdens of others, helping someone else that cannot help themselves. Another word for that is mercy. Extending mercy. Sounds a lot like Jesus. If you remember the end of the Olivet Discourse, when Jesus was on the Mount of Olives in Matthew chapter 24 and 25, he was describing the future to his disciples. And the last part of the Olivet Discourse, he's talking about the final judgment when the king gathers all the people before him, and he divides them into what is going to be sheep and goats. And he tells us what the king will say. Let me just read for you. Matthew 25, verse number 31. The Bible says, when the Son of Man shall come in his glory, and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory. And before him shall be gathered all nations, and he shall separate them one from another, as a shepherd divideth his sheep from the goats. And he shall set the sheep on his right hand, and the goats on the left. Then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, come ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was an hungered, and ye gave me meat. I was thirsty, and ye gave me drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me in. Naked, and ye clothed me. I was sick, and ye visited me. I was in prison, and ye came unto me. Then shall the righteous answer him, saying, Lord, When we saw thee and hungered and fed thee, or thirsty and gave thee drink, when we saw thee a stranger and took thee in, or naked and clothed thee, or when we saw thee sick or in prison and came unto thee? And the king shall answer and say unto them, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it unto the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me. Understand, true worship is demonstrated through justice, mercy, and compassion. Remember Mary and Martha? Martha was all busy and serving and anxious and worried and nervous. And Jesus had to say, Martha, Martha, you're all stressed out over serving. But Mary has chosen to sit at my feet and to worship me and to learn of me. It's so important that we understand that we must first have the right posture, the right spirit, the right attitude of worship before we're serving. Because if we're not careful, we get to that place of service and our heart's not in it. And we're serving for the applause of others. Or we're serving for our own pride. We're serving for the wrong reasons. So we see the solution, but now number 3, the results. The results. So here Isaiah is anticipating the words of Christ. And in verses 8 through 12, Isaiah begins to speak to them in the form of if-then statements, poetically arranged with the ifs in the middle. Let's look at verse number 8. Then shall thy light break forth as the morning, and thine health shall spring forth speedily, and thy righteousness shall go before thee, and the glory of the Lord shall be thy reward. Then shalt thou call, and the Lord shall answer. Thou shalt cry, and he shall say, Here I am. If thou take away from the midst of thee the yoke, the putting forth of the finger, and speaking vanity. Understand, it's the accusatory nature or the abusiveness of others. So verse 3, they're like, we're fasting. We're doing all these religious things. Why isn't God hearing us? Why isn't God blessing us? Why isn't God hearing our prayers? And God's saying, if you do all the right things when you call, I will answer. Look at verse 10. And if thou draw out thy soul to the hungry and satisfy the afflicted soul, then shall thy light rise in obscurity and thy darkness be as the noonday. And the Lord shall guide thee continually, and satisfy thy soul in drought, and make fat thy bones. And thou shalt be a watered garden, like a spring of water, whose waters fail not. And they that shall be of thee shall build the old waste places, and shalt raise up the foundations of many generations. And thou shalt be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of paths to dwell in. So when Isaiah sets these things out, he's saying if you do these things that God desires, if you walk humbly with your God, if you do justice, if you love mercy, just as Micah tells us, I believe it's Micah 5:2, if you do the things that God says, James says true religion and undefiled before God is to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction and to keep yourselves unspotted from the world. He said that's what true religion is. Isaiah says if you do these things, then these blessings will flow upon you. Think about the language in verse 10 when it talks about the light in the darkness. Think of the language of verses 11 and 12. That's Eden language. This is Exodus language. This is post-exile language. That is, he describes for them as a watered garden, a spring of water whose waters do not fail. Again, that's Eden language that we see here. God is saying, I will be with you and you will be like you are in Eden. He speaks of a light in a darkness. Again, verse 11, and the Lord shall guide thee continually and satisfy thy soul in drought and make fat thy bones. And thou shalt be a watered garden like a spring of water whose waters fail not. What is that? That's Exodus language. It's exactly what God did when he walked them out of captivity. Go back to verse number 8. It says, then shall thy light break forth as the morning, and thine health shall spring forth speedily. And thy righteousness shall go before thee, and the glory of the Lord shall be thy reward. That's what happened in the book of Exodus. God guided them. It's Eden language, it's Exodus language, and it's also post-exile. This portion of Isaiah is written in anticipation of the exile that has not yet taken place, when everyone's going to be carried off, or most of the people that are left in Jerusalem are going to be carried off captive into Babylon. Excuse me, but it's written to tell them that there is life after exile. They will be brought back. Verse 12, they will repair, they will rebuild, they will restore, they will be brought back. And Isaiah is gathering all the vocabulary of God's blessed relationship with this people, and he's folding it together because all of these things relate. Eden, the exile, the Exodus, all of these things. And if you think about the return from Babylon, in a sense, it was like a second Exodus. Just as they came from Egypt and went into the promised land, so they returned from exile, and where'd they go? Right back into the same promised land. The Exodus was a return to Eden. That is, they were in Egypt, a picture of what is the world, and they were brought through the wilderness, and they were brought to a promised land where God says, when you go into this land, if you obey me and embrace me and keep my covenant, this land will work exactly like Eden. The animals will work in concert with you, and the nature will help you. And he said that the milk and honey is going to flow, or the hills they're going to drip with milk and honey. Your enemies are going to flee. Everything is going to be abundant. Animals are going to bear. The land will bear. Families will bear. Everything is going to be abundant. The return from exile was just like a second Exodus. The Exodus was a return to Eden. All of that language is gathered here together today in this text to express the potential blessings of their covenant relationship to God. God blesses a life that aligns with worship and obedience. Again, that it's not for you to determine how God's blessings look. I'm certainly not speaking of a prosperity gospel, but when you honor God, God will bless you. I was listening to a message this week, and a pastor was talking about the blessings of God in his season of suffering. And whether it's noticeable or not right now, it physically, as I'm weak, God's blessings are noticeable in my life, even in the suffering, the physical suffering, the pain that I'm going through. Again, all that to say that it's not for you to say, okay, I did all these things, now God owes me. That's not what a true heart of worship is. And I give you that because it's important to understand these things before we come to the last two verses of the chapter. And the last two verses, people have been puzzled over before. It's kind of an odd ending because the burden of the chapter is to denounce the people of God because they're caught up in this form of religion like fasting. We might call them asks of personal religion, but they have no evidence of true religion. And in terms of the actual manifestation of love one toward another, there's nothing there. He says, enough with the fasting, enough with the bowing of the head, enough with the sackcloth and the ashes and all the things that you're doing, the long prayers in public. He says, why don't you show some mercy? Why don't you show somebody some love? And then at the end of the chapter, he says, now keep my Sabbath. And I'm sure some have thought, isn't that the kind of thing that they were willing to do? I mean, isn't that what was on their list of things, that their boxes they were trying to check off? Isn't that the religious activity that was denounced? And the answer to those questions is yes. It is the kind of thing that they have been short on. If you remember in the New Testament, the Pharisees, they were rigid about the Sabbath. They were offended that Jesus would heal somebody on this Sabbath day. And so, as he seems in a sense to paint a portrait of the Pharisees in the first part of the chapter, we see this exhortation at the end of the chapter referring to the Sabbath, but you say, well, isn't that what's missing? Yes, but I want you to follow the logic here. He didn't say you shouldn't fast again. He didn't say you shouldn't pray again. The denunciation of the religious works was not to get rid of them altogether. That's not what Jesus says. Jesus denounced the hypocrites of his day for the way they gave alms. Listen, you need to still give your offering. You just don't need to brag about it. You don't need to post on Facebook what you put in the plate. You still need to tell others about Jesus, but you don't have to tell everybody what you did. You can still clean the church, but you don't have to brag about the sacrifice that you made. That's what he's talking about. You can still fast, but don't walk around slumped over because you're starving to death. And again, Jesus is saying still do these things, just don't do them like a hypocrite would do them. Don't stand up and pray long prayers to be heard. Pray. Spend a long time with God. Sweet hour of prayer. We need that time with God. Go to your room and pray. He didn't say stop giving your alms. He said stop doing it in a public display. He said don't let your right hand know what your left hand is doing. Do it privately and secretly. He said when you hold your fast, wash your face, or in other words, give the appearance of strength so that nobody else knows that you're fasting. And how does Jesus respond? And your Father, which seeth in secret, shall reward thee openly. So number 4, very quickly, I want you to see the application. The application. Because true worship is not just doing things for God. It is delighting in God. There are plenty of people that do church work and they're miserable about it. They do their devotions because they feel like they're supposed to, but they don't enjoy that sweet time with the Lord. And the abuse of a thing does not mean to get rid of a good thing. That's the start. The abuse of the Sabbath doesn't mean they were supposed to get rid of the Sabbath. It's vital that when we read the chapter, we read it in concert with chapter 56, where we see the genuine, the God-pleasing faith of the eunuchs and the foreigners, and they are described as those who keep my Sabbaths. And so there's a right way and a wrong way to serve the Lord. There's a right way and a wrong way to walk with the Lord. There's a right way and a wrong way to give. There's a right way and a wrong way to pray and to fast and all of those things. And so the point isn't that you can't do religious things. The point is we do the right things, but we also do them with the right heart. And if you're serving the Lord and you're bitter about it, or you're upset that somebody else isn't doing what you're doing, or you're mad that you're the biggest giver, or you're mad that you do more than everybody else, I would encourage you to slow down and stop, because you're not doing it for the right reason. I'm all for go 1,000 miles an hour and do all you can, but only if it's for the Lord. Because if you're doing what you're doing as a competition to beat somebody else or to be better than somebody else, Jesus is saying your motives are wrong and you're in a mess right now. And with that in mind, what does the right approach to the Sabbath entail? It's hard for us because you and I live in this modern age. We live in a society, again, we talked about this last Thursday, agriculture was their life. When they were literally living off the land, they had to completely and fully trust in God. I mean, it wasn't just one day, it was 1 in 7 or 1 year in 7. And I mean, that was an immense act of trusting God because you were taking food off your own table when you could have been working to sustain yourself. Or you would give rest to a slave or to a servant. And the reason was because you knew what it was like to be a servant or a slave when you were in Egypt. And so what we're seeing here is an act of mercy. And on a spiritual level, when embraced with faith, it is actually an embrace of God himself. The language of verses 13 and 14, it says, delight yourself in the Lord. Delight. Call the Sabbath a delight. It's an embrace of God. It's upon that kind of approach to the Sabbath that God announces the blessing. Let's look at it. Verse 13. If thou turn away thy foot from the Sabbath, from doing thy pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy of the Lord, the honorable, and shall honor him, not doing thine own ways, nor finding thine own pleasure, nor speaking thine own words, then shalt thou delight thyself in the Lord, And I will cause thee to ride upon the high places of the earth, and feed thee with the heritage of Jacob thy father, for the mouth of the Lord hath spoken it. Understand, what we need is to take each one of these things and understand the big picture. It's not a question of do you fast or do you not fast? Do you do good works or do you not do good works? Do you keep the Sabbath or not keep the Sabbath? These are all just little pixels in the big picture. The big picture is being presented to us, the promises of God and the people of God living in harmony. And the solution to bad religion isn't to get rid of religion. It's structured. It's what Jesus wants us to have. It's the right religion, which is a relationship with God. And that can only be found in his son, Jesus Christ. That's why we turn into the New Testament and we see the Sabbath is actually found in Jesus. Our rest today is not found in a day of the week. It's found in the person of Jesus Christ. Jesus says, "Come unto me, all ye that are weary and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." And there are plenty of people that are part of churches, that are part of ministries, that are part of religions, and so many things, and they do stuff and have no relationship with God whatsoever. And Jesus is not saying stop doing stuff. He's saying start doing stuff with the right heart. When you do it to the least of these, you have done it unto me.